So, as far as Ted, he was 28 when he began to kill. This began in 1974. I
Wow.
think knowing their ages is interesting too.
Yeah.
Because Dahmer actually began when he was 18.
Yeah. Me
So
too.
very young. Yeah. So Bundy, when he's interviewed, I watched. I think it's called the Ted Bundy tapes.
Yeah.
That this
Netflix.
journalist, yeah, this journalist met him in the prison and recorded, his discussions with Ted. Very interesting. I think it's, I don't know how many parts, but it was good. Anyway, so he says, I want to meet with someone to discuss, that I'm innocent. That was his whole, way of coming at this. Let me prove that I'm innocent, right? So he began to talk about his life. He said he grew up a very happy little boy. He was treated good. He was raised in the church. So, he paints a picture of everything's good at home, right? So as a teenager, as a little boy, he had a speech impediment, which caused the kids to bully him, make fun of him, and he was really hard to understand. They couldn't understand what he was saying. So
Yeah.
that was, something he carried on, in his childhood. Then as a teen, he was always acting like, I'm Mr. Intelligent, and he's trying to make himself appear to be something he's really not. Okay.
Yeah.
And then he said that to this interview, he never really knew how to relate to women, although he had mostly female friends in his
Okay.
adult years. I found that interesting too.
Do you
But
know by any chance what his IQ was? Did they ever disclose that information?
you know what? That's something I didn't look into, but he was intelligent enough to go through college and law school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a very intelligent man. He was very articulate. He was very charming. He was a nice looking man. Now, I'm not, like I said before to you, I'm not one of those women that think, oh, serial killers are hot. No.
That's another mental illness
Yeah,
right there.
yeah, I think so. But he came across as a very charming, decent young man.
He's your
Okay?
average American boy, right?
Right. So, some interesting things I found out about Ted was he was raised believing his mother was his sister. They all lived in the home together.
Okay.
And when he found out, the way he found out is he actually found his birth certificate, and where it says mother, of course, it's her name, and where it said father, it was stamped the word illegitimate. Now he in his interview with this journalist in prison, he said those things didn't affect him at all. Well, we know they do. They
Yeah.
had to,
Maybe subconsciously, not consciously. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and he did say he never bonded with his mom as far as that mother-son relationship, even after he found out that was his mom. Now, another very disturbing thing about Ted as a little boy, his aunt, which is his mother's sister, lived with him too. And one night she was sleeping, and when she woke up, there were an assortment of different kitchen knives all around her body. So she wakes up.
How old is he?
I'll tell you in a second here. She wakes up, of course, like, oh my God, what the heck,
Yeah.
So she looks at the foot of the bed. Here's Ted staring at her, smiling. He was 3 years old.
So very, very early on, he displayed some very disturbing
So
behavior.
how can his, well, actually, it was his grandparents that adopted him. So he's living with his grandparents, mom, her sister, and I think he had a little brother.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, why didn't anyone take him to the doctor? But look at this. His grandparents were a mess. His grandma was an alcoholic, and his grandpa was very violent. He used to beat up his grandma, and he drank a lot too. And I think I shared with you that his grandpa was hated by the neighborhood. Everyone thought he was an evil dude, and he used to enjoy harming animals. And when Ted was very small, his grandpa made him watch him drown a cat. Now, you put all these things into the mind of a little child who already probably has his mental illness, showing forth, but they don't see it. And how does that not impact him to grow up and be totally insane?
Yeah, from very, very early on, he's introduced to violence, and he's thinking that's normal.
Yeah.
If you have that, if you have that mental illness and you're introduced to this kind of violent behavior, you would kind of embrace it a little more, than a normal 3-year-old would. Because a lot of, 3-year-olds have been exposed to violence, but they've had parents or, they've registered it differently.
Yeah,
Very
but and
interesting.
if you look at any video of his mom, I'm sorry, but she seems a little out there too.
Really? She's
Yeah,
still
there's
alive?
something. I think she passed away, but
Okay.
even when he was found guilty, she couldn't believe it. My
Wow.
this is what I found sad but funny. When she was reading the papers that he was accused, I think maybe he was found guilty at this time. She's reading in the paper that he was found guilty of over 20 murders, I think maybe
Mm.
close to 30. And this is what she said. Ted wasn't raised that way.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, who raises their kid as a serial killer? Of
Yeah.
course, he wasn't raised that way. I'm
Kind
like,
of an odd thing to say. Yeah.
right? Okay, so continuing on, I'll wrap up Ted in a second here.
Wow.
In college, he meets this nice woman named Diane.
Mm-hmm.
It's his first very serious relationship. She comes
Okay.
from a wealthy family. Ted has always wanted to be into the wealth and the high society. That's always been something he's wanted. So when he meets her, he's like, oh, cool, we got it going on, right? Well, then he starts not doing so good in school. I think he actually flunked out of law school, if I'm correct about that. And then her seeing this, she doesn't like that. She breaks up with him. So it's this rejection that a lot of psychologists believe is what really spurned on Ted's desire to kill women. And he did say in one of these interviews, maybe it was my desire to get revenge on Diane. He did say that. Yeah.
So maybe he's subconsciously killing her over and over again.
Yeah, because if you look at a lot of the photos of the women that he
Yeah.
did kill, they resembled his girlfriend. He liked women that were brunettes with long hair,
Yeah.
In the 70s, all the ladies had long hair. Well, a lot of them. So he was attracted to this type, right? Now, sadly, his last victim was a 12-year-old little girl, which is like, wow, dude, So anyway, so this is a couple things I found very interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, Ted was not taken to any kind of psychiatrist when he was growing up, which I think that stems from his dysfunctional family. They're all dysfunctional, so why would they see something or even care if there was something abnormal in Ted?
Yeah,
right?
well, plus this is the 60s and 70s, and it wasn't as predominant as it is now.
Right.
Yeah.
So I found that interesting, but here's one thing that kind of gave me the chills. While he's in prison, now his day of execution is drawing near. And another psychologist is sent to examine him, okay? And so this person says, all of a sudden, Ted's eyes grow black. Now, he has blue eyes. He literally saw his eyes go black.
Wow.
I was like, whoa. Then one more gentleman, I think he might have been an investigator, he came to visit Ted too, for whatever, interviews, whatever, So he said, right when they're talking, suddenly Ted's face literally changed and he began to ramble manically. And then he wasn't making sense. And this man said, you literally smelt a foul odor coming from Ted.
Wow.
I was like, oh boy, that's the devil right there.
Yeah. Do you want to touch on, because I had my own personal opinions, the day before his execution, he has a long discussion with James Dobson. And if anybody knows James Dobson, he's the basically a co-founder of Focus on the Family.
Yeah.
And he's a psychiatrist, right? He's a doctor.
Yeah, he's also a doctor.
And what I got from, because there's the whole, they had the war on pornography.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do believe what some of Ted is saying. And it's very hard when you're listening to Ted Bundy, because there's a lot of, you don't know if what you're hearing is him being sincere, because there's a lack of remorse. And whenever James Dobson brought up his victims, and do you feel sorry for what you did? That's not the focus right now. So he's very callous to certain topics.
Let me just interject something real quick. That wasn't the whole entire video of the interview with Dobson, because Dobson did say that throughout the interview, Ted was extremely remorseful and crying and crying and crying. So I don't know.
But I think what the most productive thing out of it, from his mind, because only God knows his heart, and we can't sit there and say we don't know if he's feeling remorseful or not remorseful, whatever. But when he draws these, kind of paints this picture about at an early age, he had these kind of taboo comics, and he's intertwining pornography with the kind of murder mystery kind of comics and stuff, and then those two would blend in. If you have someone with these, he's being, he's has his upbringing with an abusive family. He's being abused. They never looked at any kind of therapy for him. Now he's drawing lines in between these two different kind of things.
Well,
you can't draw the line in between these two. I think he has a point there when he's talking about that.
And specifically, he was drawn to violent porn against women.
Yes, that's what it was.
It wasn't just regular porn. Mm-hmm. It was you're torturing these ladies, and so he even said, when it was interesting, one quick thought, and then I'll let you get back to yours. Mm-hmm. When he was interviewing with that journalist in prison, he said he didn't blame the pornography, but it definitely fueled something within him, he said.
Yeah, I'm glad he clarified that, because he wasn't putting blame, but he's really given an insight from someone's mind who's a lot different than mine. Because me, personally, don't see that connection. As a young teen, not knowing the Lord, obviously I had my fair share of observing pornography material, but never drew a violent contrast to it in the sense where only way I can get any kind of excitement out of it is to see that these individuals are getting, they're being abused physically and stuff. So it's kind of like an eye opener.
Did you actually look at violent porn, or was it just regular porn?
No, I never really engaged in that, and I think the average male, maybe
looks
probably
like
my generation, like Ted says, you start off with the like
softcore,
the Playboys and stuff. We would see stuff on HBO when HBO first came out. We would see that. Then you got into the harder stuff. But to get past that line to where it's the violence and sexuality mixture together, I thought it was very insightful, because that's another realm of the mind where I've never even considered that, and I think most people in my generation never consider that.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting. Got a lot of flack for him after that, because, hey, obviously they're taking things he said out of context and saying, well, look at Ted Bundy. He's blaming all his murders on porn. Even in his own statement, he's saying, I'm not blaming. But here's a little something that I experienced and how I interpreted it. So I thought that was very,
And another thing was Ted usually was drunk when he did his murders, because, I think a lot of us been drunk, and you feel bold and brave, and you do things you wouldn't do when you're sober, So that's another key factor. Now, interestingly, in 2007, I think it was like a big group of psychologists got together, and they wanted to look at Ted Bundy and kind of diagnose what his mental health issues would have been. And he was diagnosed with over, I think, 5 disorders. He was psychotic, antisocial. Now, a lot of people think antisocial means they want nothing to do with society. It doesn't mean that. It means they just view society in a twisted way.
Yeah, you gave me the insight on that, because that's what I thought it was. I thought they were isolating themselves from the world, and that's definitely not what you see.
But he basically did kind of. He had his double life where he was kind of, isolated. But he did have a serious girlfriend named Liz while he was doing these murders. So that was interesting too, And so he had that borderline personality. I think he also had bipolar. So there was a bunch of them. And I'm reading this thinking, oh my gosh. So he had all these things, grew up in a dysfunctional home, and also had to get drunk. So he's got 3 things working against him.
Now,
and it's like,
if we're inserting last video's context into what we're discussing here, those mental illnesses, the pornography, the violence, the abuse, can that be a very, very big door opening for spiritual spirits to enter? I guess that's what we're trying to figure out. And I think it's this very strong case that, despite all the stuff that was going on, he still welcomed this into his heart, because it was a heart condition as well,
Yeah, because he even said, he said a couple times, I'm not blaming porn, but I'm just saying, I wanted to kill. He said that. He said, further on in his interview, there was an entity in me telling me to do things to women.
Yeah, and you're gonna get that on my end with my individuals. It's a very consistent theme going on. They're
Yeah, right.
fighting this evil force within them.
Yeah.
Now, therapists, psychologists would say it's something that chemical. It could be it's only chemical stuff going on. But us as
Right, right.
Christians, we see
Yeah.
The Bible speak of these things.
Yeah.
You
And
know.
on the spiritual side, we don't talk about sin. What
Yes.
you think
Hmm.
about, what you continually have your thoughts on, they could either be good things or evil
Hmm.
things. And we see, looking at Ted, he
Hmm.
had a sinful mind that didn't want to repent of that.
Hmm.
So the whole bottom line here really is sin.
Yeah.
The sins committed against Ted growing up in a dysfunctional home,
Hmm.
the sins of his mother being, hiding the fact that she's his mom, and then the sins of Ted not dealing with his
Hmm.
thoughts. So there's a whole message right there, our thought life, you
Hmm.
know. So the Bible says that our minds can be transformed and they can be renewed by God's power and by his
Amen.
word.
Yes. Amen.
So I'm done with Ted if you have any more input on Ted.
No, I just think that he's a very well known, probably the most well known serial killer. He has plenty of specials on like Netflix and Hulu and stuff like that. He's a very fascinating individual. He defended
Yeah.
himself in court. He was
He was very arrogant.
that arrogant, ignorant towards any kind of empathy towards anybody. Just very evil.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And even though he came across as very arrogant in the courtroom, and yes, he was an intelligent man.
Hmm.
When he was, let me say one last thing. The journalist that was interviewing him wasn't getting anywhere with him. He wanted Ted to discuss these murders.
Hmm.
Ted only wanted to discuss himself.
Yep.
His
Hmm.
child, the whole, all about him, right?
That's an ego
So
thing.
yeah. So the journalist finally says, "Listen, Ted, you're a very intelligent man. You've got a degree in psychology. How about I make you an expert witness, an
Hmm.
expert analyst? Can you, from this expert analyst view, tell me what kind of person might do these kinds of things?" So Ted began to talk in the third person. Well, this killer is
Yeah.
probably a man, and then he would just explain all these things, right? And then eventually he said, this killer was enjoying it.
Hmm.
And he dumped all these bodies at Taylor Mountain because he wanted to go. That was his garbage disposal.
Hmm.
And then he also said, this killer is very insecure. He feels cheated. He feels wronged. And I'm like, there it is right there.
Yeah,
It
it's
was a whole revenge thing.
very interesting how they can separate themselves from themselves. It's almost as if they're watching
Yeah.
themselves
Well,
partake in these crimes. Hmm.
being bipolar,
Yeah.
you're kind of two personalities. So, anyway,
Heavy
so I'm
stuff.
going.
Heavy stuff. Ted, yes.